Autonomy. We all want it, but for aging adults, it becomes the foundation of quality of life. What if the key to maintaining independence isn't just physical strength, but the brain's capacity to adapt, perceive, and move with confidence? Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. In this episode, we're diving into a fascinating and increasingly essential topic: how mental flexibility, physical perception, and kinesthetic awareness shape our ability to live independently as we age. Our guest is Angie Dortch, the creator behind Expressive Avenues, who spent 2 years developing and refining a program that has shown measurable improvements in the skills that support functional autonomy. Angie works directly with aging adults who want to stay active, confident, and in control of their daily lives, and the results speak for themselves. We'll explore the research, the real-world impact, and the simple strategies anyone can begin practicing to enhance independence and vitality and age well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health. Well, Angie, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. Let's have you tell us a little bit about yourself and what first inspired you to focus your work on autonomy and independent living among aging populations.
Well, I am the administrator and content producer for the Expressive Avenues Wellness channel on YouTube. And that channel exists to provide lessons and content for people who are desiring to live autonomously for as long as they can. It's based on Learning How to Age, which is a program that I developed with my mom when she was age 70. About living autonomously and how to do that. So we focus on 3 areas: mental flexibility, physical perception, and kinesthetic awareness. I spent 2 years working with a group of independent, active aging adults. The average age was 81, which I thought was awesome. So I spent 2 years working with them. We did a baseline assessment of their skills in those 3 areas, and then we would assess them every 10 weeks. And the results that I got from that were about a 40% increase in all areas of their skills and their ability to perform in those areas. So we got some good results from that, and so I started putting the content on YouTube because that seemed like a good way to reach out to people and be accessible to people. This also sort of coincided with a lot of the COVID stuff, so a lot of stuff was shut down, but some of the information that I'd gotten was, I thought, so valuable and important that I wanted people to be able to access it. So started putting it up on YouTube, and that's kind of where we are.
Right. And so how has Expressive Avenues and the program evolved over those 2 years? Has it changed much?
Yes, it has. Initially, let me go back just a little bit. When my mom and I were working on this together, we took it out into the field, into several assisted living and retirement communities and that kind of thing. And we would test out exercises and skill level content that we would kind of trying to produce. And that changed a lot because we started basing it on my only experience of that was teaching for the university 1 class a week to all adults. It was 3.5 hours was the class. So initially, that's how we started out, which for my mom was fine. Mentally, she was sharp as a tack, and she was probably my inspiration for continuing to do this. But she had her own physical. She was a type 1 diabetic for 51 years. She was diagnosed when she was 31. They used to call it juvenile onset, I think, back then. So she had 3 small kids, diagnosed with juvenile onset, and kind of told, in the late 60s, there wasn't a lot going on with diabetes and how to manage it and what exactly to do about it. So she kind of took it all in her hands, and she was a role model for me throughout my entire life. So the 3.5 hours wasn't a huge jump for her, but what we found was that kind of seminar approach was completely overwhelming for a lot of people. So immediately we pared it back from the 3.5 hour seminar type thing to 1 hour, then twice a week, because we also found that it was helpful for people to have the lesson, then to go away, so to see if they could retain it, but then to come back like every other day, every 2 days, and then revisit those exercises. And so that kind of helped people stay motivated and interested. And it was also a good mental challenge for their mind to grasp onto those ideas and be able to recall them when we got back together again. So that was the first big change that happened. We pared down the classes. Then we continued to fine tune the exercises. Some of the exercises are based on what I had learned in graduate school, which I have a Master of Fine Arts degree and am a performer in my past life. And so I had a lot of tools and skills available to me from years of performing and studying. And so we had to fine tune some of those. The great thing about it is the training that I had and the background that I had is a very social background. It's a very collaborative background, and that's great. But sometimes that collaboration needs to come after a certain base knowledge is laid out first. So we knew we had to go back to teaching some basic stuff first, so that we all had a common language, so that when we would enter into these lessons, everybody was talking about the same thing and they meant the same thing. So there's a little bit of a learning curve on that. So we had to develop a glossary, and like I said, some common language. So that had to be taught early on. We had to learn basic approaches to physical awareness and physical perception, and that had to be taught early on. But all that had to be taught in a way that was engaging and interesting, right? And that would keep people motivated. So we adapted to that. One of the first things I remember when we were first doing this, one of the women who was there, and these were retirement communities, so they weren't assisted living. They're technically independent living, but many of them were living in a community kind of place. But one of the first things that was said to me was when I said, the name of the program is going to be Learning How to Age. And she raised her hand. She said, I know I'm aging. You don't have to teach me how. And I thought, well, that's kind of the problem, because we all are aging. And it's not a question of, are you aging? Yes, of course. But the question is, how are you going to do that? And so I tried to explain to her that it wasn't like, let me teach you how to age. Everybody's aging. That's a fact of life. The question is, how do you approach that? So that kind of led to then turning that how into an acronym, which kind of led to more focusing, more fine tuning the program. So yeah, it's been through a lot of iterations. Some of the actual lessons didn't change as much when I was doing this 2-year study, but it helped me as a producer to fine tune exactly what I was doing, what I was looking for, making it all observational, making it as objective as I possibly could. So, and so that was helpful to me as much as it was to the participants. And one of the things that came out of that was that I always see this as facilitating, not teaching. It's their program. It's the group's wellness practice. I'm just facilitating the practice. I'm not teaching them something. They aren't waiting for me to give them information, but I am just facilitating the information that's out there that they know already from years. They've lived it. How do you facilitate that? And so I try to be very intentional about making sure that the group that I'm talking to understands the difference between facilitating and teaching, so that they take ownership of it. It's their wellness, not mine. So that's probably
You're,
really long-winded, but
no, it's not long-winded at all. And you're such a great fit for the Aging Well podcast and what we're trying to accomplish on this podcast. And so if you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. When you talk about mental flexibility, what does that mean in the context of aging?
In the context of this program in particular, it means shifting your concentration, the ability to shift from one thing to another and then back again at will. So you're choosing to shift your attention and focus. It's not just wandering aimlessly and kind of a wild thing that's kind of meandering about. You're trying to exercise those muscles that require you to focus your concentration on one thing, then shift it to something else, and then shift it back again. So that's what I mean by mental flexibility. So yeah, it's not really changing your attitude. A lot of people think, oh, mental flexibility means you want me to be open-minded, but no, it's more technical than that. It's an actual shift in concentration, which is shifting your focus, which you can do at will.
And so what's the benefit of that as we age, having that capacity to be mentally flexible?
Mental flexibility is a process. It's a mental process. And like many other processes, when we age, that can slow and become less responsive. So the more we practice it, the more accessible it is to us, and the more flexible, the more alive it is. If we don't practice something, then it kind of stagnates, kind of becomes flaccid. But if we practice a skill, we practice mental flexibility in this case, it can become stronger, sharper. There's also one of the things, as I've been working on this wellness channel, one of the things that I've come across is something called STACK, which is the scaffolding theory of aging and cognition, which is fascinating to me. It's really interesting. But I think this mental flexibility part of this program absolutely supports that, because the idea of STACK, from my understanding, is that we build a scaffolding over our lifetime of different experiences, different events, and all these things build a neural scaffold in our brain of all these things that we've experienced. And so that as we age, when the process is slow mentally, other parts of our brain will actually step up and fill in the gap and help that part of the brain, which may or may not be slow. It'll help that part of the brain to function because we have a deep scaffold, a strong scaffold over a lifetime of experiences that we've had. That's definitely my experience personally. And then also, as I've seen this work in this program, it made me feel good when I discovered the STACK, the scaffolding theory of aging and cognition, because I thought, oh yeah, yay, because there is a program that people have researched, they've studied it. The fMRI brain mapping was a huge impetus for this program also. And I liked having research-based information that can support what I know instinctively or what I've experienced personally. It's always helpful to me to then go back and go, okay, is there other research? Is there another group of scientists or researchers who are finding the exact same thing that I've experienced, that I'm talking about instinctively, but they're talking about from a research standpoint. So that's interesting to me. But
That is interesting. And do you
yeah,
find that part of the process is to a certain extent rescaffolding, that we have to kind of tear down some of the scaffolds that we've built more incorrectly over the course of our lifetimes, and then we have to kind of rebuild them in a way that's going to be more productive, more effective?
sure. Yeah, you're talking about mindset changing. Yeah, you
Hmm.
shift your mindset. Yeah, definitely. There's some of that. Some of the pruning kind of thing your brain does kind of naturally. So if there are experiences or things that you've had going on that you don't access and that you don't need, your brain kind of prunes it off, and allows other things to come forward. Gosh, I call it neural energy, kind of, to be stronger in one direction or another. But I think that's definitely true. Yeah. And then you have to relearn some habits. That's one of the things that we do. In fact, I just did a lesson on gaze, and I was talking about how we habitually, many of us, our gaze kind of naturally falls down, and what the negative effect that can have on your posture, um, your your skeletal structure, but also on your outlook and your emotional connection to the world. And as we age, our world contracts naturally, and setting your gaze at eye level versus letting it fall naturally where we habitually let it fall will keep you engaged in the world when it's already closing in around you anyway. And that's a habit. That's a habit we have to overcome. A lot of the habits, like the habit of the way you sit or you stand, or the habit of like I said, where your gaze falls. Some of those habits are just, they feel like they're natural because we've done them for so long. So some of that is having to reframe all of that, and you're building new scaffolding. And yeah, that's part of it.
So, how do physical perception and kinesthetic awareness influence our daily independence?
Um, well, physical perception and kinesthetic awareness are directly related to your relationship to the external world. Um, Kinesthetic awareness is a tougher one. I'm telling you this, but you already know that. It's an intrinsic feeling, but it nevertheless has an impact on your relationship in your external world. Physical perception, again, we're talking about perception and these awarenesses. That's always a challenge for me. Um, but that relationship of you and your world around you um, definitely has an impact on things like your balance and your awareness of your safety, your awareness of remembering things. Like one of the exercises we do, people, one of the things that I got from the 2 year study of the group of people was they would say, oh, and finding my car, I can never find my car. I park my car, I go inside to do something, I come back out and I'm like, no, now where did I park? And I thought, well, that's we all know, we all do that. So let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. So that was another part of the perception, that physical perception thing. How do you anchor where you did something like park your car in relationship to where you are and where you're going? And then when you come back out, how can you be able to be mentally flexible enough to flip that perception of where you were and then be able to locate where your car is? So there's that was a kind of a direct way that physical perception was impacting people. Unless you've
Yeah,
never lost your car, then that's okay. I mean, I do that pretty often. So
that's why they have that little beeper thing on the
yeah,
key
right,
fobs now, right?
right, yeah. I've even been guilty of popping my trunk
Oh,
for
really?
my. It's like, okay, if I just pop my trunk, then I'll know where I am. So, but yeah, it's just it's again, it's a habit, right? It's a mindset. You just have to get into the habit of saying, okay, I'm going to intentionally ground where I am in my world, around me so that when I come back out, I can reconnect to that. And then they also go so much together. That's also a good memory exercise, which exercises your brain. A good sensory experience, which is it goes directly to your brain. It's all so interconnected that it's hard to almost take one piece out and talk about it individually. But that's kind of what I did in the program. Though I thought I've got to separate all of these things that are like overlapping like a big web, and see if I can't tear them apart, tease them out, so that I can then see, oh yes, we can work on these individual things, but they're always going to have an impact on the other. So.
We'll take a quick pause to acknowledge the affiliate brands that help make this podcast possible. These aren't sponsors, and no one pays for placement. But when you use our affiliate links, it supports the mission of the Aging Well podcast. One partner I've chosen after careful vetting is Berkeley Life, known for their nitric oxide support products. I value their commitment to quality, testing, and education around vascular wellness, and I use their products myself. If you'd like to support the show and explore Berkeley Life for your own health journey, you'll find a link in the episode description. So as you've looked at developing this program, you've probably seen a lot of things that we tend to overlook in much of the traditional aging and fitness programs. Why do you think some of these areas, first, what are the areas that are most overlooked, and why do you think they are overlooked when we look at traditional fitness programs, healthy aging programs?
Yeah, one of the things that Mom and I talked about when we did this was that, first of all, physical aging, rightly so, and I'm glad of that. I'm happy for that. But physical aging, physical wellness is a concept that's been looked at for 30 years. So we didn't need to try to develop another physical wellness program. We all know how to do that. And we're not going to learn how to cook and eat healthy because we've all got plenty of programs to do that. I think part of the reason we went with the mental flexibility, physical perception, and kinesthetic awareness is because that seemed to be a gap in the wellness dimensions of wellness that was studied. Physical wellness has been studied because we easily have metrics to study it with. We can track our weight, we can track our blood pressure, we can take a blood test, and that will tell us information about our health. And there wasn't really a way to track these other aspects of wellness, although in the aging population in particular, a lot of these subtle wellness aspects were the most important. And so that was part of why we decided to focus on that, because they are squirrely. They're hard to get a hold of. They're hard to explain, and they're hard to practice. So we saw kind of a gap there. I think, like I said, physical wellness, we know how to track that. We've got the metrics on how to track that. And we've got now 30, 40 years of data on that. We don't have the same kind of tracking mechanisms or data on these other more subtle dimensions of wellness is kind of what I would say. We just saw that as a gap, and we saw that as also I had some skills from my previous work that could go along with filling in those gaps. And my mom had some skills from a lifetime spent working on her own wellness. And so we saw that as a pretty good marriage and a way to kind of start focusing on some dimensions of wellness that are kind of neglected because they've been challenging in the past.
So as you've looked at the data that are collected from different programs and such, what improvements have you seen improve the most consistently?
What do you mean, from my program or in
From your
general
program,
wellness?
yeah.
Oh, from my program. The most accessible part of my program is the mental flexibility, for sure. because that is something that you can. I do one exercise in this program that kind of marries the best of improvisation and physical ability, mental sharpness, and physical sharpness with an exercise I call ball toss. That's a real clear indication. That's as close as I can get to that spontaneous being able to react and respond in the moment, as almost anything else I do. The physical perception and kinesthetic awareness are, talking about your perception of something, and that's such a difficult thing for me to be able to really explain and understand completely, just because it's a very limited. It's a very niche kind of aspect of dimension, and it's one that's so incredibly complex. It's way above my pay grade. It's one of those things that I know instinctively, but I don't know that I have got the ability to statistically show it. Now we tried. We set up an assessment for mental flexibility, physical perception, and kinesthetic awareness. And we have objective assessments in all those areas. And we, as I said, we assessed participants every 10 weeks, and we would get the results. But I would say the mental flexibility is the assessment that I think is the most objective, and the most black and white in terms of, did they do it or did they not? And here's the data. And then how does that data support what the premise is, which is that mental flexibility is something you can practice and learn. It's not something that you're just born with. So I don't know if that answers that question very well or not, but yeah. So I would say, yeah.
So were there any results that surprised you the most?
I would say that there was a result that surprised me in a way that only just because it kind of highlighted my own limited ability to explain it. The physical perception piece is the piece that I know instinctively that there are improvements in. But trying to put that in an objective, statistically based kind of way to test it and assess it was challenging for me. So I ended up having to rely as much on participants' self-reporting as from my own objective observation, which I don't think is ideal, but that's what I relied on, because I know that as your perception adjusts to your physical ability, that changes your relationship with your external world, and that has an impact on like major hot button issues that are talked about now, which is like balance and fall risk and all that kind of stuff. I know all that instinctively, but I don't know that I was able to prove it. So, but I still had good results, but I just don't know if the assessment that I constructed for that is necessarily as solid as the one that I constructed for mental flexibility.
Sometimes I think we just have to go on instinct and not worry about the whole real statistical analyses of things. I mean, we can get bogged down sometimes with statistics, and the more we get bogged down with the statistics, we begin to lose some of the nuanced benefits of the programs that we're doing, because we're focused on one thing and we're measuring that, but the adaptations that we're seeing in the population are so much broader than that one variable.
Yeah. So. I'm so glad to hear you say that, only because I had to make myself sit down and write out these assessments and figure them out objectively, because that is so foreign to me. It's just, I'm so much more comfortable with instinctively responding and reacting, probably because of my training. But having to put into words and into a chart to map out all that was a huge lift for me. That was a good mental flexibility exercise for
There
me.
you go. Yeah. So, what are some simple at-home practices that our listeners and viewers can, try to improve their mental flexibility and or physical perception?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because I think the mental flexibility is harder because I relied on a lot of the mental flexibility stuff. I relied on the interaction between people. But the ball toss exercise, I kind of have adapted to tossing it against a wall and doing some things like that. But there's still no substitute for the spontaneous moment when a ball is going to be tossed at you that you don't know, and then you have to respond when you catch the ball. What we did with that was there was a verbal recitation, and then we would do it one word at a time as you go around, and so you never knew who was going to toss you the ball or when the ball was coming to you, and that's a spontaneous, like an improvisation moment that I found it challenging to kind of replicate as an individual person at home. The physical perception part, which I found the hardest part to document with a group, is the part that I find the easiest to adapt to myself as an individual, because you can do things like use your non-dominant hand to do things, open bottles, brush your teeth, unload your dishwasher. Just how often, becoming aware of how often you choose to reach for something with your dominant hand, and making yourself go, okay, I'm gonna switch that. I'm just gonna try this with my non-dominant hand and see what effect that has. Then things like parking your car, grounding yourself. We did an exercise where I used blocking terminology from the stage, from how an actor develops kind of that awareness of where they are in relation to the stage. And so if you can adopt that in your life, adopting where you are from your perspective and looking out into the world, and how does that ground you in a reality that is based on from your perception, not just being out wandering around not thinking about anything, but being intentional about saying, like, so if I were on stage, this is center stage, that was downstage, which would be like the place you're walking to, so that when you're coming out of that place, then you remember, okay, so let me flip this around in my mind. This was downstage, it's now upstage, and that was stage left, it's now stage right. So and becoming comfortable with that is a way to kind of ground yourself and help anchor where objects are, like your car. And then I have an exercise that I do that came directly out of this group. We started leaving, when they would come into the practice, leaving an object anywhere in the room and just leave it there. And then we would go about the practice. And then at the end of the practice, I would say, and now recall where you left the object. And then once you recalled it clearly, go and retrieve it. And so we started doing that with one object, then with two objects, then with three objects. And so you can do that in your daily life, right? You can say, I'm going to intentionally, I just did this not long ago too. I was wrapping presents and getting out Christmas decorations. So, you've got 1,000 tools everywhere. You've got scissors one place and ribbon one place, and then Christmas ornaments here and these that need to be repaired. So I decided to take all my tools, and I would put my tools in specific locations. And so I would see then if I could recall when I needed, like, my scissors, where did I put them? Can I recall it? And then I would go to where I thought I had left my scissors. And if they were there, yay. And if they weren't there, okay, let me go back now and take another break and let me see if I can recall it. Um, so that's a way that you can kind of start adapting a lot of these exercises into your own life. It can be, my husband laughs at me because he'll say, what are you doing? I'll say, oh, I'm practicing something because I'm quiet doing something when I'm, whatever he said. You're always practicing something, Angie. You're always thinking about something. I said, I know. It's a habit. It's a habit I kind of developed from an from a standpoint. I guess you became an observer, somebody who really watched closely things. In particular, when you were trying to develop a character, you would closely watch people and you observe things. So I get into the habit, I've developed the habit of observing myself and how I would go about doing things. In particular, this really came into focus after I was in a catastrophic car accident. So I had a lot of challenges that I was having to overcome myself. And so I habitually got into the habit of every moment is therapy. Every moment in life can be an opportunity to learn something about yourself and grow. So as I started to adapt that every moment approach, that's also the kind of the approach you can take with some of these lessons. You can spend every conscious moment of your life trying to achieve something. And then every now and then you can just go, I'm going to sit down and watch TV for a minute, or I'm going to read a book. Let me just sit here for a second and not think about anything. So that's needed also. But I think I did that so much that it's a habit for me. And that's a habit that I try to encourage people, because sometimes they would get overwhelmed by it. They would kind of like my husband and say, can't you just take a break? And I was like, you know what? Yes, it is okay to take a break. That's okay. So
Sounds like that's not a bad habit to develop early in life rather than waiting until we get closer and closer to what we might label as old age. I don't like those
no,
labels
yeah,
of old age,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, for sure. And this, I briefly just mentioned the catastrophic car accident was, that's what I was in my 40s, my early 40s. And it's interesting, like so many people, you have something that happens um, that is catastrophic. And in retrospect, now it's the greatest blessing that I ever had. But what happened was when all of your abilities are taken away from you. I had a traumatic brain injury. I was in a coma for 10 days. And emerging from that coma, you I couldn't speak, I couldn't feed myself, I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything for the longest time. And so it was a matter of getting each one of those skills back one at a time. And this goes to the scaffolding thing. I think a great part of that had to do my, a great part of my ability to do that, to rehabilitate, came from that scaffolding that I had created in my brain from years of experience and practice of these skills. And so there were things that I was able to grab onto when I needed them and that were there. And it was just a matter of reconnecting those neural pathways. And so, yeah, that, excuse me, that happened when I was 41. So that's not quite as early, I think, but it was still pretty early. So,
that was only a couple years ago then.
yeah, I was like, yeah, 2 years ago. No, yeah.
So, how can caregivers or family members support these kinds of mind body training habits?
I think the first thing is they have to understand that they're valuable. I think they have to understand that they are important and that they have an impact. Um, you know, I spent a lot of years when I was teaching, in particular, when I was teaching um, that 3.5 hour class once a week for adults who were working, had families, but they were coming in at night to take their college classes to get their degree in whatever. And I realized as I was teaching that class, what I need to figure out is how these skills from the performing arts can impact their lives and make their lives better, and how they can take something away from this class besides just, I need these 3 humanities credits. What can they take out of this class that's going to impact their life, regardless of their field, regardless of whether they're a nurse or a teacher or a construction worker or a mother of 5? How are they getting something out of this class beyond just those 3 credit hours? So I first started doing that when I was teaching that class, and I realized it's really important to kind of develop an audience, develop a good audience. So I guess that was one of the things I would say about how to make caregivers support this kind of work, this kind of mind-body connection, is that they have to be educated and they have to know that it's important and it's valuable. And then the other part of it is they have to allow, if they're the caregiver, they have to allow the person to have as much autonomy as possible. And I've said this, and I've taught this program at assisted living facilities. And I would say to them always, if you need help and you need assistance, absolutely take all the help that you need, take all the assistance that you need, but don't take more. Take what you need, but don't take more. So much of the habit of caregivers in these larger facilities are to provide. So you want to provide things for people. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to say, here's what is possible. Can you do it? And if you can't, I'll help you, but let's help you learn how to do it, or help you retain the ability to do something, as opposed to, let me just do it all for you. Let me just take this over for you. Because that's actually a less loving response, I think, than supporting them. It's kind of like the difference between being a facilitator and being a teacher. I think I want to encourage people to facilitate independence and autonomy, not take over someone's life, but to facilitate their life, to help them maintain their life.
Doesn't sound that much unlike how we should and hopefully do approach parenting, right? Where we want our kids to grow up and have that level of autonomy. Well, why would we stop doing that as somebody gets older and are under our care again?
A perfect example. Yeah. Aging is another stage of life. I think Abraham Maslow has the stages of life. And aging is another stage of life that we learn things about, and we approach just like any stage of life. Like when we learned how to walk, when we learned how to drive, when we learned how to navigate interpersonal relationships. As we age, we've never been this age before. We're learning how to be this age, and that's understanding that and being okay with that is again, it's kind of that mindset shift that has to happen. I think some people think as you age, you know everything, you've got everything. This is the way it's going to be, and this is the way you've done it, and so this is the way you're going to continue to do it. And it's a stage. This is a stage that we're in. We've never been there before. So let's learn about that stage, just like we learned about the stage of 15 or 25. It's a stage. And let's learn about it. And let's learn to do it as the best way we possibly can.
So for clinicians or coaches in the aging well spaces, what's the best way to integrate these concepts in their current work?
best way, it the best way to integrate it into their current work, I think, is I think to understand that doing for somebody isn't the same thing as doing with somebody. To kind of change the mindset of what a caregiver is, and understand that that's valuable, to be a supporter, the scaffolding, we'll use that term again, to be the scaffolding underneath that person, not to be the building on top of that person, but to be the scaffolding. And that's tricky, I know, because of, especially in the larger communities, assisted living communities where people are all living in the one place. You have to allow people to work at the very edge of their ability, because I think that's where growth happens. But that's also scary, because at the very edge of their ability is risk. And these big companies have liability issues and insurances that they're trying to deal with. And, but I think, I think in a small way, if you just start thinking of your own relationship as scaffolding, not the teacher, I think maybe that'll start to change that a little bit. That starts to change that mindset. It's kind of like the wellness paradigm from 30 or 40 years ago. When that first started, that was, people just thought, this is ridiculous. What are you talking about? Give me a pill, give me a shot, and then go on. So that was a paradigm shift. And I think the mindset around aging has to have that same kind of paradigm shift. So that's a challenge, but it's one that I think is worth it. So
I think it's one that takes a little bit of patience too, because it's a lot easier to just step in and do for somebody when we're a caregiver, as opposed to just being there, like you said, to be the scaffolding, to be the support, to prevent them from hurting themselves if they,
good point.
There's a chance of falling or whatever. You're there as that support, but you're not there to do.
Right. It's just like you said earlier, it's like parenting in a lot of ways. You don't want to do for your kids. You want to wait and let them learn how to tie their shoes, even if it takes you 15 minutes longer than it would have taken if you just said, give me your shoes, I'll put them on for you. But what do you want? Yeah, what do you want? What are you trying to do? So, yeah, that's a good point.
So is there a particular participant story that captures the power of your approach?
Gosh, let me grab a drink.
I might too.
There are several, but there's one in particular that I can think of. I was lucky enough to have 3 men in that group that were 90 or more. And so that kind of skewed my whole average age up to 81, which I think is just awesome. But this one man in particular was single. He had lived alone his whole life. He was a copy editor. So linguistically, he was very sharp. Physically, he had some difficulty, but he walked everywhere, every day. So he kind of overcame that from just diligence and perseverance. He came to the class, and he kind of exemplified the class because he was linguistically sharp, mentally clear, but had a few physical difficulties that he was overcoming, but he was going to overcome those. He was letting them just kind of swamp him and make him sit down. And he was curious, and he had that mental curiosity, and so he, twice a week would come and would try and engage and do all the exercises with an open, willing attitude and a curious attitude, that mental curiosity, which is hugely important for mental flexibility in particular. So he also loved one of the things that he loved most about the class is also one of my favorite things about the class. But I will be honest with you that the majority of the people in the class do not like at all, which is the journaling. Which I have a committed journal that you keep that has prompts for each lesson to encourage people to journal. And there's so much research about why journaling, writing, in particular script, is good for you mentally, as well as that physical, sensory kind of experience you have when you're writing. And I loved that. He loved it. So he would write and write and write about the experiences that he had in the class, encouraging other people, discoveries he made about himself. So much so that I ended up giving him another journal, a second journal. He filled up the first one, so I love that. But that's something that I think is really, really valuable. So yeah, he was my star pupil. I guess I would say that. Although there was another man, like I said, I can go on. There are so many people that have, well, probably each individual person has something specific about their life. I had one man who was a fighter pilot in World War II, and just watching his ability to do certain things, his ability to work in a coordinated fashion between his upper body and his lower body, had a direct relationship to the fact that of learning of flying a plane from when he was fighting, and it was just fascinating to watch. And then the images I would encourage them to create a guiding image for a certain physical activity, and the images that he would create in his mind. One of the images he gave me was a plane doing loop-de-loops in the air, and you could tell just by the way he talked about it and then how that affected his movement. He had that image that was so clearly part of who he was because he had experienced that. So yeah, he was a neat person.
So, from your perspective, why is autonomy the number one goal among older or aging adults?
Well, that's not from my perspective. That is, I did like a little 5-question survey, like what did you like, what did you not like, what is the most important for this, and remaining autonomous was the number one thing that all of the participants said they wanted to achieve. And in fact, most aging adults will say now, if you Google, give me the statistics on autonomy, the majority of people hope to remain autonomous, hope to remain independent. Now, hope is not a plan. So, how you're going to do that is one of the reasons why we developed a program. This gives you the skills. This equips you with the skills to maintain your autonomy, given that there's no underlying disease, given that there's no chronic illness that requires outside intervention. These give you the skills to maintain that independence, which we all want.
So, as your clients begin to age and they start seeing more age-related changes, That's obviously going to make tasks a bit more challenging. So how do you help the clients redefine that autonomy when those changes take place and when their life is becoming more challenging?
That was one of the things. That was one of the things that I thought the physical perception was the most helpful with, which was that just acknowledging that the way you perceive yourself in the world is not always an accurate reflection of the reality. We kind of have a perception of ourself that doesn't always match the reality, and how important it is then to test that perception and to always keep that perception to expanding and moving forward, just like your life has expanded and moved forward. And I give this as an example. I was out on the monkey bars with my daughter when she was probably 5 or 6, and she was playing around, on swings and monkey bars, and I thought, oh, I used to love doing the monkey bars. I think I'll do that again. So I thought, I'm going to hop up there and swing across the monkey bars. Well, I that was a wake up call to me. I mean, I couldn't do it, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. What, you know, I used to be able to do this for hours. Well, my perception of my ability did not match the reality of my ability. And so that is so important, because if our perception does not match reality, that's when injury happens. That's when accidents happen. So you always have to be sure that your perception matches your reality, not is this false perception that you have. So I guess I was just trying to encourage participants to always test their perception in a safe environment. That's where you can find out, how close is my perception to reality? How far away is it from reality? You don't want to find out the answer to that question while you're out trying to swing on the monkey bars with your child and you can't even raise yourself up. You want to test that perception in a safe environment and then know, so that when you go out into the world, your perception and your reality match more closely. That was one of the things that, I mentioned the older man who was 91, who had some physical challenges, but so he walked everywhere. One of the ways he was, I think, able to overcome a lot of that was he practiced that walking a lot. He would walk to the grocery store. He had a certain path that he walked. He had a certain direction that he walked. He knew it. And as he walked that path and became familiar with that path, his ability to walk in that path would change based on his age, and he could make subtle adjustments as he needed to. But it was because he had practiced and he was aware when he was there. He wasn't just mindlessly wandering, not thinking about what he was doing. He was intentional about it. So, so that's what I would say. I would encourage people to not let their false perception keep them from engaging in the reality, but practice that perception, practice your ability in a safe environment, practice at the edge of your ability, push yourself to go as far as you can, so that when you are out in your daily life, your perception and reality are more closely aligned.
I like that. And I like that you're emphasizing, testing those abilities, those perceptions, as opposed to just accepting them. Because oftentimes, you're talking about our perceptions being greater than what we think they are, being able to do the monkey bars. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you could have easily said, I'm too old to be doing the monkey bars. I can't do those anymore, and never even try. And so there's got to be that balance between trying to push ourselves to advance or do things that are a little bit more challenging, rather than just resigning ourselves to saying, I can't do that. And so we
Yeah.
want to test our abilities and do it safely.
And realize that when you're pushing yourself to the edge of your ability, which is absolutely where growth happens,
Mm-hmm.
there might be some, embarrassing moments. Like I ended up on my behind on the floor, in the dirt on the monkey bars experiment. And, I was like, well, okay, here I am. That was embarrassing. But what did I learn from it? And thankfully, they had that cushiony kind of foam, stuff they have on playgrounds. So I didn't get hurt. Um, Thankfully. My perception though was leading me in a direction that I could have gotten hurt if I hadn't been testing it in an area that was safe and hadn't pushed myself to the limit. Actually, I pushed myself beyond my limit. But yeah, I know it is scary. I mean, it is scary to. It's hard. It's hard for me to encourage people to take a risk, but like I said, I think that pushing yourself to that outer limit, that's where growth happens. So I agree with you.
Yeah, my field's exercise physiology, and I talk often about the overload principle. Whatever area you are attempting to grow in, you don't grow unless you're challenged to a level greater than that to which you were accustomed. And so if you don't try something a little bit
Mm.
harder, and the idea is it just has to be a little bit harder, doesn't have to be extreme, you're going to see growth.
Yeah.
Or you
Say that
might
again.
fail
Challenge yourself to the level. What did you
greater than
say?
that to which you are accustomed. That's the
Greater than
principle of
that to which you are
overload.
cousin. Yeah, oh, okay. Principle
Yeah.
of over. I'm going to write that down. The principle of overload.
Yeah, I say that quite frequently as, as a professor.
Oh, that
So,
makes well again. That's my. It makes so much sense.
yeah.
Yeah, instinctively, that, but how
Hmm.
do you communicate that to people who either are completely opposed to it or um, have risk aversion?
Hmm.
I don't know. So
Yeah, I also talk to my students. I mean, we talk about the principle of overload, that you have to do more than that to which you're accustomed. But there's also this idea of overreaching, and then there's overtraining when we talk from a physiological standpoint. And to me, overreaching is an essential piece where we are in a controlled fashion. We're doing more than we're accustomed to, knowing that there's a risk of failure, and more likely we are going to fail as opposed to being, successful at it. But when we get into overtraining to me is really just foolish training. It's doing something stupidly in the gym or, in the sports arena, or, your coach being coached by somebody, that coach isn't doing their job correctly. That's the only way we really get to that point of overtraining. And so in your population, I would think the idea that, we can fail is inevitable because we're going to be trying things that are a little bit more challenging. But the risk of getting hurt and, severely hurt is going to be negligible because we're doing things in a controlled, smart fashion. We're not doing much, much more than we're capable of doing. And we're doing it in a controlled, safe fashion, but just doing a little bit more. We're not getting accustomed to, because there's also that principle of reversibility, that use it or lose it. If we don't continue to do what we're accustomed to doing, we're going to revert back to lower training levels. And that's what happens a lot with aging, is that and we're told this from a standpoint of, you go to your doctor, well, you're just getting old. Well, that doesn't mean I have to decline. It just
yeah,
means, I have a few other things I might have to adjust in my lifestyle. But if I
you have
continue to persist at doing,
modifications.
yeah, we do
Yeah, you have
modifications, we
modifications.
persist.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what's new for Expressive Avenues? Are you developing any new programs or resources?
Um, Not really. Right now, I'm working on. I did a series of classes focused just for facilitators, And right now I'm trying to focus on doing just a series of lessons for individuals. So, but right now that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm going to making people aware of the positive impact that these kinds of approaches have on wellness, on aging. Um, just trying to make people aware of that, and continuing to work on the making it as accessible as possible for people who want it, and encouraging people who don't know about it why they should want it.
So, in addition to your perception exercises and such, what else are you doing personally to age well?
I try to get enough sleep. Um, I I drink a lot of water. I continue to do research on perception, and fMRI, the brain mapping stuff. That's the idea of your brain and the connection of your brain and your body, is fascinating to me. Um, that was always interesting to me, but in particular, it became fascinating to me after the traumatic brain injury. And when I discovered the first book that I discovered about this was "Mapping the Mind" by Rita Carter, and it was about the fMRI skill mapping that they were doing of your brain, and how they determined that yes, our brain actually is malleable. It's not this fixed rock. Once you get to be 25, that's what's going to be, and that's what's always going to be. It's actually a malleable. The concept of neuroplasticity. Um, so I continue to research and do a lot of reading about that, and I try to apply what I've read, um, to Expressive Avenues Wellness, and ways to incorporate what we're learning about our brain, into our life daily. So,
So, where can our listeners and viewers learn more, connect with you, and explore your work? I know you have a YouTube channel. We can kind of reiterate that, and we can put all this in the description notes so people can access you.
okay. Yeah, it's at Expressive Avenues Wellness on YouTube. And then I post the lessons and a lot of content on a lot of the basic social channels. Although I'm not as active on the social channels as I should be, but I'm trying to utilize their ability to mass produce this kind of content, push the content out. Or the best way to reach me specifically about something is Angie at learntoage.org, which is the email address. I have a website, although it's now not the most accessible, probably, website because um, the name, I don't have a dedicated name, domain, I think is what they call it. Um, but if you Google Expressive Avenues Wellness or learning how to age, sometimes that will direct you to that website. But again, email me, Angie at learntoage.org, or you can go through the YouTube channel, Expressive Avenues Wellness.
All right, we'll connect everybody through those links. Is there anything we failed to talk about today? I feel like there's so much more we can dive into, and I love the fact that we're kind of on that same page in terms of what it means
Yeah,
to age well.
yeah. I think um, if I wrote down anything else that I wanted to be sure. Um, I don't think so. Um, just I think what we've kind of hit on already, which is just um, that autonomy is possible as you age. Um, given, like I said, and I've said this before, there's no chronic illness. There's no that has to be administered. Like, for instance, my mother was, I think I told you this, I mentioned that she was a diabetic for 51 years, type 1. And until the last 2, maybe 3 years of her life, her diabetes was under her control. Then it became brittle, at which point then she needed to have someone to monitor her blood sugar hour to hour. So she actually ended up moving into an assisted living facility for that purpose. But until her diabetes became brittle, she was managing that herself. But if you have a chronic condition that needs some outside intervention, then, if there's a disease that requires that kind of help, then you obviously, that's going to affect your autonomy. But if you want to remain autonomous and if you want to remain independent, there's no reason why you can't. There's no reason why. I think maybe it's not even an old-fashioned perspective anymore, or maybe it's just because I'm swimming in that water, so it seems like it was old-fashioned, but it's not. It isn't about just retiring and getting into a rocking chair and sitting on your front porch and whiling away the hours. Now, there's a time when you want to do that for sure. Like when I was doing this program, the sweet spot was usually 68 to 73 years of age. When you first retire, you want to sit down on your porch and rock, or you want to go golfing, or you want to go travel. You don't really want a regimented kind of thing that you have to do every day. You've done that for 65 years, or you've done that for 40 years. But eventually, you're going to need to get back to the idea that aging then is now your job. Living becomes an intentional thing that you're going to do. And how can you enhance that as you are no longer required to be in the workforce, going into the office, meeting people on a daily basis? How are you going to encourage those same kinds of things in your later years? And there's a way to do that, but you have to be intentional about it.
And I think it's important to not spend too much time in that rocking chair right after retirement, because sometimes you don't get up out of it.
Right. Yeah. I had one man say he was going to leave the study before the 2-year point where we ended. He said, "I'm not going to be coming back because," he said, "and I think that's okay." He said, "Now, because I'm going to be writing a novel." That's just not sitting there. I said, "No, that's good. You're fine. That's going to be fine. Yeah, if you're working on a novel, then I think it's okay. Just be sure that you stand up every hour or so, stretch, open your chest up, get your shoulders back, get the blood flowing." But no, yeah. So there are definitely, there are extremes on either way. And it's finding that sweet spot there that you want to live in, so.
Well, this was a fascinating conversation. I'll have to have you back again. We'll get an update maybe in several months or so and see how the programs are developing. But I really enjoyed having you.
Yeah.
Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep helping people age well and keep aging well yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aging Well podcast. Please like, subscribe, or follow, and share this episode with a friend. And be sure to visit the affiliate links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep aging well.